I call myself Melissa Carter. I have 38 years. I was born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the heart of the so-called Bible Belt, the Bible Belt of the United States. My entire childhood was spent in the church. On Sundays, in a flowered dress and Bible in hand, I sang in the children's choir while my mother led the women's group and my father took care of Sunday school. Faith was part of who I was, or at least that's what I thought. I got married early at 21 to Ethan, a calm, hard-working boy, a convinced Christian. We did everything right, as we were taught, dating without intimacy, marriage in the temple with traditional vows, and soon after we began a simple life but full of promises. I worked as an administrative assistant at a Christian school. He was a maintenance technician at an energy company. For many years, I believed that we were living God's plan. But time did what it does to many marriages, slowly wearing it down. And it wasn't a tragedy, a betrayal, or a scandal. It was silence, emotional distance, loneliness for two. We started sleeping at different times, talking only as necessary. Prayers together became memories, and in the place of love a type of tiredness grew that I don't even know how to explain, a discouragement that seemed to swallow everything. I talked to God, you know. I said, "Lord, this cannot be your plan for my life, this dry marriage, without affection, without purpose." And little by little I began to accept a very common narrative these days. You deserve to be happy. I started consuming content that confirmed what I wanted to hear. Conscious divorce advice, Christian leaders saying that God wants our happiness above all else. One day I walked into the room, sat on the bed and said, "Ethan, I don't want it anymore." He cried. He asked us to try one more time, but I was determined. I signed the divorce papers with a strange feeling, neither relief nor pain, just an emptiness, as if I had erased a part of my history. But I moved on, believing I was being honest with myself and with God. 6 months later, I went into cardiac arrest. It was sudden. A supermarket meltdown. I passed out between the cereal shelves. I remember hearing distant voices, sirens. Then everything went dark. That's when my soul began to wake up to something much, much bigger than I could imagine. The first sensation was a bang. As if I had been thrown from an invisible building in free fall. I felt my body, or something like it, being pulled down, violently. And when I finally stopped, I realized I was no longer in the supermarket, or anywhere I knew. It was dark, but not like a room without light. It was a living, dense, almost liquid darkness. I tried to see something, anything, but there were no shapes, just a suffocating pitch which seemed to enter through the nostrils and settle in the chest. The air was heavy. Each breath seemed to burn my lungs. And then the scream started, first one, then another, until dozens of female voices filled that place like uncontrolled echoes in an eternal tunnel. They cried, screamed, begged, voices of women like me, and for some inexplicable reason, I knew from that. I felt that. They had the same pains, the same struggles, the same dilemmas. I just wanted to be happy. He never really loved me. God knows I tried. It was a mistake, a mistake. Each scream cut me like a knife. I wanted to cover my ears, but I realized I no longer had hands. Or better yet, I didn't have a body like I used to. It was as if I were pure consciousness. And that scared me. I tried to run, but there was no ground. I tried to cry out, but my voice dissolved in the dark atmosphere. And then came the most terrifying sound of all, a deep, collective groan, as if thousands of souls were wailing at the same time. An old, dragging pain that seemed to come from the depths of eternity. That's when I understood. I was in a place of judgment. It wasn't hell like in the paintings, with fire, devils, and tridents. It was something much more subtle, and therefore much more cruel. A place where souls were confronted with the spiritual consequences of their choices. Not external punishments, but internal pains, open truths. And in the midst of that terror, a phrase echoed in my mind, as if it had been breathed straight into my spirit. 99% of them are here, because of choices that seemed justifiable. But in the face of the truth, they were just an escape. I trembled. I wanted to scream, protest, say it was unfair, but something shut me up inside. I knew what they were talking about, and for the first time I began to see my story in a different way. But there was still more, much more, because in that place of darkness, someone was approaching, a presence that illuminated without light, and what he carried in his eyes would change everything. I felt it before I saw it. It was as if the very space around me had stopped pulsing with that pain, as if time, if there was still time there, was bending before something, or someone. The darkness was not dispelled suddenly, but began to recede like mist before a breeze, a gentle breeze that carried holiness. And then he appeared. Cannot describe his face in human detail. There were traces, yes, but it was like looking at the sky at dawn. There was light, there was color, there was intensity. It was Jesus. Not the Jesus of the paintings I saw at Bible school, but the living, eternal Christ, full of glory and weight. He did not wear a crown of thorns. He was the crown itself. The screams stopped. The voices, once desperate, now fell silent, as if his presence commanded respect even to pain. But when he looked at me, my inner world collapsed. His eyes weren't just eyes. They were mirrors of my soul. In it I saw everything: my childhood in church, my promises of fidelity, my tearful prayers as a teenager, my marriage, the moments when I could have fought harder, the harsh words I spoke, and the times I remained silent when I should have healed. Everything was there, wide open, no excuses, no masks. I felt ashamed, a shame so deep that it seemed to tear me apart. I wanted to hide, dissolve myself in that shadow, but he didn't take his eyes off me. And then he spoke. "You were part of a pact, Melissa." His voice was firm as thunder, but at the same time full of mercy. "A covenant before me, and when trouble came you did not consult me. You sought comfort, not counsel. You believed in your pain more than in my grace." Every word was like a sword piercing my soul, but not to wound. It was a pain that healed, as if something was being ripped away, the deceit, the pride, the self-pity. "I know how much you suffered. I saw your tears in the dark room. I was there when he ignored you. I felt your loneliness. But you weren't alone, and it wasn't the end. You chose to leave early. My tears didn't fall. They flowed from within my essence, as if each memory was being washed away one by one. Melissa, there are eternal consequences for hasty decisions. You have been deceived by an incomplete truth." He approached, and when he touched my existence, everything in me trembled. It was as if pure light coursed through every piece of who I was. But I am the God of second chances. At that moment, I knew there was still hope, that he had not rejected me, but awakened me, and what came next would be even more overwhelming. After he spoke those words, I felt myself being moved, not walking but being led by a gentle force, as if carried by his own will. Darkness continued all around, but now there was a path, a space between darkness, like a corridor of transparency within eternity. Jesus walked ahead of me, and even without a physical body, I could feel my feet touching something. Each step was like passing through layers of my own consciousness. It was all spiritual, but more real than anything I had ever experienced on earth. We entered a kind of gallery, but it wasn't made of paintings or sculptures. It was made up of presences. Female figures, thousands of them, suspended in what seemed like a frozen timeline. They were as if shrouded in a thin fog, and each one seemed to relive the exact moment of a choice. I saw a woman on her knees, tearing up her divorce papers as she cried. Another, hugging a stranger in a hotel room, her eyes empty. A third, alone in a dark kitchen, looking at a ring on the table as if it were a prison. Jesus turned to me and said, "These are incomplete souls, women who broke pacts before their time, driven by real pain, but shallow decisions. They were not condemned by the mistake, but by the refusal to hear my voice, even when I screamed in the silence." My eyes burned. I recognized feelings in them that were also in me. That bitterness that I called justice, that tiredness that I wore as a flag, the desire for freedom confused with rebellion. "You don't see sinners," he continued. "You see daughters, my daughters. But many of them have chosen to believe in the voice of the world instead of mine." I no longer knew where the vision ended and my own confession began. I cried for them, for me, for the ease with which we exchange eternity for momentary relief. Marriage is a spiritual covenant, Melissa. It's not just paper. It's not just convenience. It reflects the union between me and the church. That's why it's so attacked. That's why it hurts so much when it's broken out of time. One of the women looked me in the eye. It was as if she saw me, as if to say, "There's still time." And at that moment a light began to shine at the end of that gallery, an invitation, a way out. But first, Jesus took me to one last place, where I would confront not the mistakes of others, but my own judgment. The light that appeared. Her head was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was not blinding, but penetrating. She didn't blind, she exposed, and as I got closer, I felt like layers of myself were being peeled away. Beliefs, certainties, excuses, everything was falling like veils swept away by the wind of truth. Jesus stopped in front of something that looked like a mirror, but it did not reflect the body. It reflected the soul. And when I looked, I saw myself, not Melissa from RG, nor the one in the profile photo on social media. I saw the woman behind the masks, the one who cried at dawn and smiled during worship. The one who said everything is fine with her lips, but screamed in anguish inside. And in that reflection, I saw something even deeper. My disbelief disguised as maturity, my camouflaged pride of independence, my choice to leave my marriage, not as an act of courage, but as an escape from the process God wanted to use to shape me. Jesus didn't say a word. He just stood next to me, watching with me, and that was more than enough. His presence there made me understand the greatest judgment does not come from outside. It comes from within, when the light reveals who we are without filters. I wanted to retreat, scream, undo everything, but it didn't work. Then, a question echoed in my mind. It didn't come from outside, and it came from within, as if it were the voice of my own conscience finally awakening. What if your pain was the field where God wanted to sow a new kind of love? In that instant, I remembered simple moments with Ethan, of the coffee he prepared without saying anything, the way he prayed with me even when we didn't have answers, from the day he cried when he signed the papers and said, "I still love you." And then I saw my reflection crying. It was no longer a frozen image. It was as if I were inside that mirror in front of myself, begging for forgiveness, because of the rush, because of the hardness, for insensitivity. Jesus then touched my hand. "I didn't bring you here to condemn you, but to awaken you. You're still alive." It was as if time stopped. I can still rebuild. The light grew. The mirror shattered like glass, turning into mist. And I felt something breaking inside me, a release, a call to fidelity, not by obligation, but by revelation. And then, for the first time since it all started, I really wanted to go back. When he said I was still alive, something inside me began to pulse with a different strength. It wasn't just hope. It was a kind of urgency, like my soul was being pulled back to a place I hadn't valued before, as if life was a gift that I had treated as routine. The light around me began to spin in spirals, and everything I had seen, the women, the mirror, the gallery, became distant but unforgettable. Jesus still held my hand, and even without words, I felt that something was being written there, a new page, a fresh start. "You will wake up," he said, his eyes full of mercy. But remember, the experience was not a punishment. It was a revelation. He looked at me like someone delivering a mission. "Speak. Tell what you saw. Warn, yes, but love. And walk with those who are still blind. They don't need accusation. They need light." I wanted to stay. I wanted to keep hearing his voice. I felt like a small child who just found his father after getting lost in the supermarket. But he smiled with that look that mixes authority and tenderness, and in that smile there was a promise. I will be with you, every day until the end. In an instant the light expanded and swallowed everything. I felt like I was being sucked backwards at speed. The heat turned to cold. Peace turned to physical. Despair. And suddenly a sharp pain in the chest. My eyes opened violently and my throat let out a scream that seemed to come from the bottom of the abyss. I was in a hospital bed. Machines beeped. A nurse was shouting, "She's back, she's breathing," and I, still between worlds, cried. I cried without being able to stop. I cried for everything I saw, for everything I understood. I cried because I knew God had given me back. Over the next few days, doctors came and went. They said it was a miracle, that my heart stopped for almost 5 minutes, that there was no explanation for why I came back without any after effects. But I knew it wasn't just a medical miracle, it was a mission. I started writing down everything I experienced, piece by piece. I remembered every face, every word, every touch of heaven in that dimension of judgment and mercy. But before anything else, I looked for Ethan. I spent hours with my cell phone in my hand. His name was still saved, Ethan Carter. Even after the divorce, I never had the courage to delete it. But now, each letter of the name weighed like a reminder of the pact I had broken, and the door that might still be ajar. I took a deep breath. I called. He called 4 times. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. When the call went to voicemail, I felt like a coward. I was about to hang up until he returned. My hand was shaking when I answered. "Melissa?" His voice came hesitantly, cautiously, as if he was already expecting pain. I couldn't respond right away. I just cried, a cry so vulnerable that he was silent on the other side. "Are you okay? What happened?" "Ethan," my voice was hoarse. "I died." His silence was total. It felt like the world stopped for a second, and then I told, not everything, not yet, but the essential: cardiac arrest, what I saw, the presence of Jesus, the warning, the other women, the revelation. On the other end of the line, he didn't doubt it. He didn't question it. He just cried with me. "I asked God, Point, for you to come back one day, but I didn't imagine it would be like this." We met up 2 days later at a park we used to go to when we were engaged. It was raining a fine drizzle, the kind that seems to combine with emotion. He came with a blue umbrella, swollen eyes, and a restrained smile. When we looked at each other, I felt it. Something still existed. It was no longer idealized romantic love nor the comfort of routine. It was something purer. It was as if we had both gone through a desert and back. "I'm not here to ask you for anything," I spoke. "I just needed to look into your eyes and say, 'Forgive me, I ran away, I hardened my heart, and I saw what it did to the spiritual world. Jesus showed me. Ethan, he showed me everything.'" He looked at me for long seconds. Then he reached out his hand, his eyes teary. Maybe God allowed this pain so we could learn to truly love. We sat on the wet bench, not caring about the rain. He held my hand as he did before, but now with more awareness, more fear, more truth. There was no kiss, no hasty promises, just a silent pact to start over. And there, under that drizzle, I knew. The miracle wasn't just that I came back from death. The miracle was God giving me the courage to return to what I destroyed. The peace I felt upon meeting Ethan again didn't take away the responsibility that burned in my chest. It was like a fire inside the bones, an urgency that wouldn't let me sleep. I needed to speak. I needed to tell you what I saw, not like someone pointing the finger, but like someone who came back from a fire warning that there is still time to escape. I started with my closest friends, Christian women like me who were also tired of their marriages, some already separated, others on the verge of decision. We arranged a coffee date, and when I sat down with them, the atmosphere seemed light, until I opened my mouth. "I've been in a place of darkness, and I've seen women like us, crying, yelling, and Jesus showed me that 99% were there because they abandoned their pacts for futile reasons." The silence that followed was deadly. Some widened their eyes, others lowered their heads. One of them, the most direct, interrupted me with a trembling voice. "Are you saying we are doomed? That God punishes us for seeking a better life?" I took a deep breath. My heart ached for them. I knew what it was like to think like that. I was also blind. I also thought that God only wanted my happiness, until I understood that holiness is sometimes expensive. But it is there that true life reveals itself. I'm not here to judge anyone. I'm here because I saw it, because I lived, and because Jesus' love is so intense that he pulled me back to say it. There are decisions that carry eternal weight, and divorce, when there is no betrayal, abandonment, or real violence, is one of those burdens. They cried. Some in silence, others in open tears. Each one reacted in a different way. One left without saying anything. Another hugged me and said, "You saved me today." Over the next few days, I recorded my testimony on video, not on YouTube yet, but a simple video, looking at my cell phone camera, without makeup, without filter. I said everything, with tears, truly, with fear. And I sent it to a women's group at the church I attended before the separation. The reaction was a hurricane. Some thanked me as if I had delivered oxygen in the midst of drowning. Others accused me of propagating guilt, of regression, of spiritual machismo. But I was no longer afraid, because that message wasn't mine. It was from Jesus. And I knew he wanted me to be a voice, a living warning, because sometimes the greatest proof of love is saying what no one wants to hear. It wasn't easy. After the video spread, there were the crooked looks, the whispers, disguised as concern. Some leaders called me to talk with that tone that said, "You're exaggerating, Melissa. This could hurt women in pain." But I already knew how to distinguish compassion from connivance. Yes, there are situations in which divorce is a legitimate escape. But what I saw, what you live, it was a sea of pacts torn up by pride, by boredom, by a need that had never been addressed, and that no one wanted to face. It was easier to call myself a fanatic than to hear the scream of souls. In that darkness, and still I continued, I started receiving messages from women all over the country, people who saw the video because someone shared it. One wrote to me, "I had divorce papers in my bag when I watched your testimony. I spent the night praying, and the next day I asked my pastor for help. I still love my husband, I was just tired. I read this message and cried so much that I had to kneel down, not out of pride, but out of fear. It was God saying, 'Keep going, I'm with you.' At home, things with Ethan slowly began to blossom. We saw each other with different eyes, more aware, less romantic, more real. We started praying together again. We cooked together. We laughed. We cried. We talked about everything, even the mistakes we didn't want to repeat. He confessed something to me one night while washing the dishes. "Do you know what kept me going after you left? The prayer. I didn't know what to do, so I just asked, 'God, don't let her get lost.' I broke down. The man I thought didn't care prayed for me. While I sought advice from modern videos and texts, he spoke to the sky, and heaven heard. And that's when I understood. The field looked burned, but God already had seeds there, and all it took was a breath of obedience for them to sprout. Our marriage is still not perfect. It never will be. But now it's an alliance, it's a mission. It is fertile soil watered by tears that once flowed in the dark. And today they bloom under the light of grace. And it all started with a death. That became life. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I'm still there, in that place of screams, of shadows, of feminine souls marked by choices that seemed justified, but that cost too much. But it's not fear that wakes me up, it's purpose. God gave me life again, but it wasn't just for me to rebuild my marriage, and it was for me to echo a call, a cry of warning, a breath of hope, an outstretched hand for those who are on the edge of the abyss and think the fall won't hurt. Since that day, my life became a ministry, not with a microphone or a pulpit, but with intimacy. With table, coffee, listening, and truth, I started gathering women in my house. We opened the Bible with trembling hands, hurt hearts, and teary eyes. And little by little I saw something precious happen. Repentance. Not the regret that paralyzes, but the one that frees, which takes you back to the place where you tore up the promise and plants a new one. I talk to women who have already separated, yes, and I say the same with love. God forgives. God restores. But never again should this be treated as normal, just because it is common. Marriage is not a civil contract. It is a spiritual alliance. It's not about judging. It's about waking up. Some returned to their husbands. Others decided to seek healing before repeating patterns. And many, so many, simply said, "Thank you for saying what no one has the courage to say." My testimony now runs through churches, online groups, short videos and lectures. But it's not fame, it's responsibility. Every time I tell it, it feels like I'm reliving it, but with less pain and more gratitude. Because Jesus didn't just save me from physical death. He saved me from the death of my conscience, of the death of the alliance, from the death of truth. Ethan and I renewed our vows. We didn't have a party. It was just the two of us, in the same rain park. He has the same ring, me with the same heart, but now transformed. I looked into his eyes and said, "This time I know what I'm promising, and for whom." And today, if you're listening to me, I'll leave you with just one thing. Do not treat as light what God established with the weight of eternity. This is my story, a story that almost ended before its time, but now carries an echo that goes beyond this life, an echo that I hope reaches you, life, an echo that I hope reaches you,